Okay, first thing you need to do is to draw your template vessel life size, then fold it in half, and then cut it out, which is what I have here. And then what you need to do is you line it up on your cardboard. And this is a very important part, is to line it up on this edge right here. And it's also important that these two lines are true, that they're perfectly square. So you may, if your cardboard's not perfect, you may need to square that up to make sure it's perfect. And so then, so you make sure and you line that up right to that edge. And that is a very important part. And I will explain why in just a minute. So then I'm going to go ahead and trace this on to my cardboard. And then this is the part I throw away. I do not keep this. Trash. And then this here is my template. So next thing you do is you cut it out, and then you want to make sure that you did a good job with lining it up and making sure that it's absolutely perfect. And so a good way to do this is just to take a ruler and then draw it out to make sure that it is exactly what you want it to be. So I still have my piece of paper here. So this tells me how big I want the base to be. So I'm making sure to line up my template perfectly on this edge of the ruler. And so when I do that, I can tell, yeah, that's what I want. And if you accidentally mess that up, this is what it would look like. So this is an example of one that I cut incorrectly on the bottom. And so when I line it up, so we'll just do right here where you can still see it. So I'm going to line it up perfectly on the bottom of this ruler. And then here we go, lining it up perfectly on this ruler. And you can see this is not the same. And the reason this is not, so you can see this here and this here are two different sizes. And so the reason that happened is because I wasn't careful in making sure that these lines were perfectly perpendicular. So it's really important that you make sure to have a true piece of cardboard and to really make sure this line is perfectly straight with the vessel. So you see, when I line these two templates up, the difference isn't gigantic, but it is definitely big enough to make a big difference in the shape of your vessel. So that's why this edge is very important to get it nice and straight so that you'll end up with the shape of template, the shape of a vessel that you want. And then you can protect it with tape. So just any old masking tape. And so this will make your template last a little bit longer. And then when you do this, it allows you to go around the curves much easier. This is called darting. This is often what you see when you sew, when you use pattern pieces in sewing, is you do a lot of darting. And so that allows your piece, your tape, just to curve around the edges really fast and easy. And this just adds a layer of protection so that your template will last longer. So once you get your template made, then it's time to get started. So I'm going to start with the white ware. And this is what your clay cutter is for. Cut your clay. So when you're not using your clay, always make sure to wrap it up so that it doesn't dry out on you. So I need to start with the base of my template. And so I've got to start with a pretty flat piece of clay. And so the easiest way to flatten it out is just to throw it down. And so you'll notice that I'm throwing my clay at an angle. If I were to throw it straight up and down, it's really likely to stick to the table. I'm working on a canvas table, which makes it a lot easier and a lot less likely to stick. So then you're going to take your rolling pin and roll it out. And so when I roll my clay, I don't go straight up and down and roll and push it into the table. What I like to do is I like to push it outwards. And when you roll out your slab, generally you want to roll it in several different directions. This helps keep my clay from sticking to the table. But the main reason I like to roll my clay out in several different directions is it makes my clay slab a lot stronger, because clay is made out of a bunch of little particles, clay particles, and if you just roll it one direction, they'll all be aligned in one direction. And so if you roll it out in lots of different directions, it's going to be a lot stronger. Similar to if you think about plywood, plywood isn't just made out of wood that's laminated one direction. There are lots of different directions, and that's what makes it stronger. And so you're going for a thickness about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit thicker. Let's just take this ruler and measure and see where we are. So the thickness is from here to here. So it's a little over 1/4 of an inch. And that's a really good thickness. And so now, in order to know the circumference or the radius or the diameter of your vessel, you're going to need a compass. And so this is where your paper template comes in real handy. All you do is you measure that. That's your radius. And then you can just do this. And now, that is the foundation of your vessel. I like to dip my clay in water, just a little bit of clay in water, and just fill that hole in. And then when you get ready to cut this out, use your cleanup tool, and you want to cut straight up and down. You don't want to wobble back and forth, because you'll end up with a circle that is not perfect. And this is the foundation of your vessel, so this step is important. So you want to cut as straight up and down as possible, and to make it as circular as possible. And then this clay that you're not using, dip it in water, because it's dried out a little bit just from rolling it out, and put it back in your plastic bag so that you can reuse it over and over again. That clay now has a whole bunch of trapped air in it, and so it's going to have to be wet the next time you use it. So it's important when you pick this up not to distort it. So it might be a good idea when you roll out your slab of clay, get yourself a wear board, put your slab of clay on the wear board first, and then cut it out so that you're not picking it up and distorting it. That's a good idea. So to get started, hold up your template and figure out where your first coil goes. My first coil is just going to go right here on this outside edge, on the top of this vessel. Every template vessel starts out a little bit different. When you're making your template, the one thing I did talk about is it's very important to have a foot. And so I have this foot that tells me exactly where to stop. If I don't have a foot, as you're making, right now it seems simple, but as you're making your template, it's easy for your foot to slide underneath, and you never really know if you're going to the right place or not. And so sometimes it slides underneath, sometimes it doesn't, and you'll end up with something that's not symmetrical. Also, when you're making your template, don't make a stingy template. this is a good example of a stingy template. So this is a problem that's going to be around, and it's going to be a pain in the butt. But mostly this area here is the biggest problem. Because when you're using your template, if you only have a small base, it's easy to rock back and forth. And you might be thinking you're being super straight and you're making something symmetrical. But if you're rocking back and forth with your vessel, it's not going to be symmetrical. So you want, when you make your template, you want a nice big base. So that way it is always flat and you're not rocking it back and forth. Also, when you're working on a wear board, it's good to have a generous sized wear board. This might be a little on the small side. So it's easy for me to accidentally do this and not even realize it, you know? So you really want to make sure that you've got a nice flush base, a nice big wear board to work with. So as I get started, I'm just grabbing the clay that I didn't squish up because I'm not going to wedge right this instant. So you want to start with coils. And so basically I squish it in my hand first, turn it into a coil. Then I work it into a coil more. And then with my hands, I use the full, from my fingertip to the palm, I use both hands and I just roll it back and forth. And so when you do this, it's really easy for your coil to kind of square. That's okay. If you end up with square coils, it's okay. They don't have to be perfectly round. And so this is kind of a small coil to start with. You generally want a generous sized coil. This isn't bad. It could be a little bit bigger. And so the first thing you want to do after you make your coil is to score. And so I'm just using my serrated rib to score with. And I'm just creating some nice texture here is all I'm doing. And then you're going to want to use slip. So the reason that I score and slip is that it's the part that helps glue the whole vessel together. So if you've ever ridden bikes and you got a flat and your parents taught you how to fix your flat, basically what you do, you find your hole and then you use sandpaper and you sand the hole and then you glue it and then you attach your patch. This is the same principle. So the scoring creates texture, which will create texture for the slip to sit inside of. And then the slip is the glue. So I've put my first coil on and I need to make sure I push down the coil so that it's really contacting my slab that I created. So I use my serrated rib to blend. And so as you're starting, sometimes your rib doesn't really fit. And so you can use one of your wood modeling tools to blend your coils. And so you want to blend the inside and outside. My serrated rib fits, so I'm just going to use it to blend my coil. So you got to blend the inside and the outside. And it's because it's small, it's hard to blend. It's hard to access. And so this is where I very carefully pick up my vessel without distorting it and turn it upside down so that I can blend it together. And so when I do this, oftentimes I'll blend my coil in a couple different directions. And also what I have to be careful to do is not to distort the bottom of my vessel here, because if I distort that, then I'm not going to end up with a circular symmetrical vessel. So I'm just going to be very careful here not to mess that shape up. Okay. So then you want to make sure it still fits your template, and it doesn't. So all I'm going to do is push it around a little bit to make it fit. So now I need to do my next coil. So when you're building, your clay is really wet right now and it just wants to fall in love with itself. So that's a good thing. The wetter it is, the stickier it is, and the easier it is for your coils to join together. You don't have to use one continuous coil. You can use pieces at a time. And so you also want to use plenty of slip. And so I'm not scoring or slipping the back of my coil. I'm only scoring and slipping this top area. You don't have to bother scoring and slipping the coil as well. So the reason I'm using a fairly thick coil is so I scored and slipped. Now don't forget to push down your coil so it's full contact. And when I'm pushing this down, I'm also supporting the wall underneath that I just created. And so the reason that you want a really thick coil to start with is because you'll notice as I blend my coil into the clay wall, I lose some thickness because I'm dragging part of the coil down into the clay wall that I've just created. And so the reason I like to use this rated rib to blend with is it really grabs that clay and you can really pull your clay around with the serrated rib. Just really grabs a hold of it. So I'm carefully turning it over so that I can blend this other side. So right now, the water is your friend because I'm really not too concerned about the clay sticking together. So right now, the clay is all the same consistency, it's all wet, and it's all gonna stick together nicely. And so because the clay is sort of wet, I don't have to do the best score job. That's why I'm using my serrated rib. That's a good enough score job. Because when it's really wet like this, it's just gonna stick together. And don't be stingy with your slip. Use plenty. I'm mostly using the paintbrush. I'm not painting my slip on. I'm using it as a tool just to lay my slip on top of. Then go ahead, add your other coil. So one thing that you want to pay attention to is you want to try and make your walls, your clay walls, the same thickness throughout. Because if your clay wall is thick in one area and thin in another area, it's going to dry unevenly. And so when your clay dries, it shrinks. And so if it's shrinking faster in one place and slower in another place, it's going to crack. So it's really important that you're creating your clay walls the same thickness throughout so that you avoid that cracking situation. And so if you feel like you've got some thin spots for some reason, oh, don't forget to push your coil down. But if you feel like you've got some thin spots in some places, score and slip and add a little bit more clay so that your clay wall is the same thickness. And at some point, I won't have to turn my vessel over upside down to blend the coils together. So oftentimes when I'm blending, you'll notice I'm cradling my clay wall on this other side because I don't want to distort it. And I'm being fairly aggressive with dragging my clay around and trying to get rid of those coil lines. And so that's why I'm supporting it on the other side. So now let's see how it fits. Well, that's terrible. It doesn't fit at all. But it's no big deal. I'm just going to pull it out. Clay is malleable. And so it pulls out and it holds its shape pretty well. And the very important thing to do is make sure you're paying attention to this corner here and you push it in and it's meeting the bottom of your vessel every time. And so throughout the entire process of building your whole vessel, this always needs to touch the bottom of your vessel. Otherwise, you're not going to end up with what you planned on. So I can probably put another coil or two on here. Maybe I would just recommend maybe one more coil. And that's because right now, like I said, the clay is fairly wet. And because it's so wet, it's going to collapse on me at some point. Uh, Also, since I'm adding all the slip, which is just basically watered down clay, I'm making my clay even wetter than what it started with. And so at this point, I'm really not concerned about it collapsing. What I'm more concerned about is distorting the shape of the vessel. And so you'll see what I mean in just a minute. Okay, push it down after you score and slip. Make sure you push it down and then blend it together. And so it is still kind of hard to get to this back side, so I'm gonna flip it over. Okay, so that is actually fitting fairly well. If it needs to, that's a good fit. Sometimes they start to collapse on you and fall down. So if you need to pull it up, you just use both of your hands. And I use these two middle fingers, and I really push up with that. And I push up and I push it together so that it will bring the whole piece up. Because if you just do this, you're just displacing this lump, that clay all the way around. But if you use both hands together and cup it, you can really bring it up. I didn't need to do that, but sometimes that happens when you're doing your own vessel. So I need to pull it back down a little bit. So this right here is a really good stopping point because my clay is too wet to go any further. Because when I put my next coil on, it's going to be really easy for it to collapse and fall down because it's so wet. But also, really what I'm concerned about is I've done a really good job. I've made it fit the template. It fits perfectly. If I keep working on it, see how floppy this is? It's just easy to distort. It just distorts really easily. So if I let it set up a little bit, then I can keep building on it and it won't be distorted.